Okay, so hello everyone. I hope you've had a smooth morning and that you are ready to hear all about things open educational resources at this second webinar of the 2025 iteration of the annual CRIG seminar. So my name is Teresa Devitak. I'm one of the research and liaison librarians at the Victorian Government Library Service. I'm also a member of the CRIG seminar working group, which has planned the seminar and will jointly facilitate it. The name of this year's seminar is Open Doors, Open Minds, Shaping Inclusive Library Futures. So as we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia where we live, learn and work. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of the Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations peoples and communities and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, sky and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. I would also like to welcome and extend my respects to First Nations people who are attending today. And I'm coming from the Wurundjeri country in the Kulin Nation. So today, if you have followed our seminar promotion on LinkedIn over the past month, you will be familiar with the Raven mascot competition, which closed yesterday. So one inspiration behind choosing the Raven as our seminar mascot stems from its deep cultural significance to the Aboriginal peoples of the Kulin Nations. The Raven or crow, known as Wa, is one of the two principal social moieties or totems in this region. Wa is both a creator figure and a trickster. I can associate with that. And alongside Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle, plays a vital role as an ancestral spirit. These totems are central to the identity and social structure of the peoples of the Kulin Nations, whose country spans what is now central Victoria and home to many of the Kaval member institutions. So now just a little bit of housekeeping before we go any further. So if you have any technical questions during the session, please type them into the chat. And the Kaval team will try and assist you when possible. So the chat is also the space to connect to others today. You can share your reflections and thoughts on anything raised in the presentations. At a virtual event like this, the digital chat plays an amazing role as a connector and thought stimulus. However, if you find the chat distracting, you're welcome not to engage, or can open in a separate window and hide it behind something. I'd like to acknowledge and thank our neurodivergent attendees as well, and those with visible and invisible disabilities for being here today. Throughout the webinar, you're welcome to take breaks, stim, use assistive tech, or interact in whatever way supports your comfort and focus. You can always drop a sunflower emoji in the chat to indicate engagement if you are off camera. You're welcome to engage with the content on social media. The CRIG seminar working group will be using LinkedIn and the hashtag CRIG 2025. If you have any questions for the speakers throughout the webinar, please submit them through the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we will get to as many as possible during the Q&A segments. Through the Q&A function, you can also see the questions of others, upvote questions and or add comments to existing questions as appropriate. The questions in the Q&A function will be refreshed for each presentation. Okay, so today's event will comprise of two keynote presentations, each followed by its own facilitated Q&A segment. I'll shortly introduce today's first keynote speaker, who my working group colleague Marcus Chester. Thank you, Marcus, liaison librarian publishing at Federation University Australia, who will facilitate the Q&A with. After our halftime break, Kate Friedman, digital learning and capability librarian at Australian Catholic University, will introduce and facilitate the Q&A with our second keynote speaker before I come back to wrap up for the day. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce our first presenter, Leigh Frost-Camilleri. So Leigh is a lecturer at the Federation Access Studies, FAST, program and the Master of Teaching at Federation University Australia. An early career researcher, Leigh's research interests include vocational education and training, educational equity, and neurodivergence in tertiary institutions. Leigh is the recipient of the 2024 NAEEA National Excellence in Teaching Award for his work in enabling education. Leigh has presented at various conferences, including the National Centre for Vocational Educational Research, Australian Vocational Education and Training Research Association, Australian Council of Deans of Education Vocational Education Group, and the Skills Highway Forum in New Zealand. That's a mouthful. Well done, Leigh. So Leigh has worked as a secondary school teacher, both in the private and public streams, primary school teacher, TAFE instructor, and in higher education for over 15 years. He's currently completing his PhD studies in second chance education and student re-engagement. I really do appreciate that coming from a parent. So on behalf of everyone here today, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Leigh. So Leigh, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Wow, what an introduction. I don't even know whether my presentation is going to be able to match that. Thanks so much. That was a mouthful. So I do appreciate that. So thank you so much for that. Seems that I do too many presentations and not enough finishing of my PhD. Um, Look, thanks so much for having me here today. I was just explaining to the group before, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole looking into this, especially this idea of sort of embedding access and inclusion. And whilst that's sort of been my teaching and education focus for, the majority of my learning or my practice, I suppose, I was really interested to see the impact that libraries have on the tone of universities and how that's sort of built up and changed over the years. So I want to talk to a little bit to that. Just before I do want to say I'm on Wadawurrung land out here. It's always uh, grey, cold. A lot of people complain about it. I love it. I love this. I don't like the sun. I have a bald head and I always get burnt. So I love the country that I get to live and work on. And I welcome and extend my respects to any Indigenous people within the room and any elders, past, present, and emerging. I have a copyright notice. I think that gives me street cred when it comes to librarians. I'd like to think it does. I reckon Alison, who's one of my colleagues who I'll be mentioning a fair bit, will be very proud of me with that. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the structure. It's nice to know what's actually going on. I'm going to talk about sort of the shifting nature of libraries in terms of what the research talking about. I mean, you guys are living it, but it does help to have the research backing what you were experiencing. So we'll talk about that. We did a neurodivergent study over the last few years that have made some really interesting insights and some points. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about my OER that I released this year and what that was like. We will look at the neurodivergent lens a little bit because I think that is probably the next frontier in terms of how do we actually support the differences within people and what we can actually do about it. And then, of course, there'll be time for questions, depending on how quickly I go through this. But because I know that a lot of people who work in libraries love to do these sorts of things, and I love to get to know people. I'm going to put this in the chat as a link if you're using a computer and prefer to do it like that, but you can do it on a phone as well. You can also opt out if you like. But this is a 3-2-1 bridge. 3 words, 2 questions, and 1 metaphor about inclusive libraries. I just want to get an idea of where you guys are sitting because I might adjust what I'm doing based on what you guys say. And I already see there's some people in that 3-2-1 bridge. I'll leave this up for just a little bit longer in case you're fumbling with your phone because someone sent a message and you got it distracted. That's me constantly. But maybe keep doing that. Keep going on with that because I know it can take a bit to come up with a metaphor. I'm happy for it to be a simile if you'd like to write, you know, as is kind of connected that way rather than just it is, and that's all. We'll give that a couple of seconds. While that's doing its thing, let's talk a little bit about the shifting landscape of the university library. you've had this huge movement to electronic collections. I think the last time I spoke to a librarian at the uni about it, he was saying to me it was about 95% of our collection is now online. Um, and then, I think more recently they've said, oh, I think it's actually quite higher now if we were to look at it. So, I mean, this idea of the libraries, going through the books, and trying to find what it is you're trying to find and all that, that's changed. That's moved. That's very different. You also have this sort of repurposing of physical space. Um, Now, in the past, it was sort of, people in their little pods and doing their bits and pieces. Now, they're sort of learning commons areas. And you guys have been sort of made to manage all this different stuff, which is really interesting because there's a huge change in role. You've had service expansion, like particularly for academics, it seems. Like you spent a lot of time looking after academics when really, realistically, in the past, that was never really your job. But now, if it's a research question or something like that, it falls on you to be able to say this is the answer to that, which is an interesting shift. Uh, Much more growth in research and the data management roles, which never used to be the case before, but now that exists. Expanded research support I've already talked about, but this scholarly communication. I remember talking to a librarian not long ago. He was saying, "Hey, when you collect your data, have you thought about doing it this way? Have you thought about doing it that way?" I'm like, "Wow, I didn't even know this was a library thing." But now it is, let's make sure that other people can use your data. So it's very interesting. And then you've got this, like everyone's got the budget problems, the sector pressures, and the sort of priorities that are coming out because of that. So I suppose the important thing I'm trying to say here, according to the research, is that your role over the last 10 to 15 years is completely different. It's completely different. So I mean, the first point that I want to make about that is, I mean, I did a search. That's what Google thinks library is. Is it? Is it? Is that what we see now? It's not what I see. I didn't curate that or anything. That is literally just a screenshot. These are not what I see in libraries anymore. I don't see them like that anymore. So it's a massive identity shift. Let's have a quick look at this 3-to-1 bridge because I've seen some things come in. Love this UBU. Like a zoo, all sorts of creatures in one space. Yeah. Libraries are like a warm hug for everybody. I would agree with that. What should we ask? How do we move from accommodating to including? Love this concept where everyone feels seen. Fantastic. Okay, so we are pretty much in the same spot. If you keep writing in that, I can keep checking that as we go. Because and in the chat as well, if you would like. So I mean, you've had this drastic change in what libraries do, but why hasn't, and this is the question, why hasn't inclusion transformed at the same rate? Now, that's not me saying libraries need to do more. Certainly not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that that has not been the priority that has been laid on you. Now, in order to figure out what it is we can actually do about this, one of the things that my research group did was ask neurodivergent staff and students, because we have so much data that says, look, that they're just not connecting, they're having difficulties with the social aspect of it, they're having difficulties accessing the learning. There's lots of issues going on there. So we asked, and we got a huge response, round about the 700 response mark, from students, ex-students, and staff who are also turning around and saying, well, yes, I'm neurodivergent. Not that I tell anybody that. And I like that this is anonymous because, I'd like to be able to say that. In order to normalize this, though, in order to normalize this more, I'd like to say I'm neurodivergent. I'm both autistic, ADHD, and dyslexic. I come from a very neurospicy family, and we're very aware of it, and we're very much see it as strengths, particularly my sons. I think this is an important step for us to sort of identify and to talk about it, but I also respect anybody who is not comfortable to do that. But what we wanted to do is sort of present some robust evidence on the barriers, the gaps, the issues that we have, and the opportunities that we might be able to develop. So these were the key findings, and hopefully you can see that okay. Sometimes the font's a bit small, but hopefully that's all right for your screens. But the one of the big findings, 75.3% of neurodivergent students report self-reliance or a complete lack of support. Again, I don't think, or at least in reading the bits and pieces that were there, I don't believe that it is a case of the supports aren't there. It is a case of I've tried to access supports in the past and it hasn't worked, so I don't bother now. So we have this problem of neurodivergent people coming to university, massive transition, which we know that we already struggle with. And then they say, well, I'm just used to being self-reliant. So I'm not going to ask for help. I'm just going to do it myself. Okay. So despite our best efforts, despite our best, like we've got this and we've got this for you, and you could talk to this person, we can support you this way, and we've got this room, and you still have a reluctance to actually ask for support because sometimes it isn't met. Now, there's a huge stigma. We already know this, though. This is what we found, though. Huge stigma around seeking help. If I seek help, then there's something wrong with me. A lot of the neurodivergent students who did the survey said, I wanted to see if I could do it on my own first. So a lot of the time, what they do is they'd access services a lot later. They wouldn't access services before they start or even in the first few weeks. They would wait until they failed a couple of assessments and then they would say, oh, I might see if I can get a learning plan now. So this again is an issue. They fear the stigma of it. If the lecturer knows that I'm neurodivergent, then they're going to treat me differently and I'm not going to be as accepted. That's the fear. So we also found that 60% lack confidence to actually even ask for the support. At least that's what they said. So under the call report where they talked about, libraries being neutral, safe, and affirming places and that the tone matters, my argument would be don't underestimate the power you have as a library to be the central point for a neurodivergent student to feel accepted, included, connected. Okay. I'm not saying that there's not responsibility on the academics and everything. Absolutely there is. And that there are things that need to change around that. But there's a lot of research to suggest that the libraries are the beating heart of the university and the central part. They set the tone for everybody else. So let's make sure that we don't underestimate that power. But, do our library policies assume that all students are equally comfortable asking for help? That's just a provocative question I'm giving you to reflect on. I don't know the answer to it. I couldn't find anything in the research that sort of said one way or the other, but I thought it was an interesting question that came up as I was reading through some bits and pieces. Let's have a look at some of the other findings that we had. One of them was this awareness and knowledge. So only 48.3% of neurodivergent students knew that there was even support services available, which is staggering. It's under half. Didn't even know it existed. That was a really worrying statistic to us. Despite all the promotion, despite all the things that we would talk about, despite all the rallying and the talking to people at different levels, we need to make sure everyone knows that this is a thing. They're still not seeing it. How we address that, I still got the answer, but at least we know what one of the problems is. So less than half of the staff as well have any sort of formal neurodivergent training. Now, one thing we also have found more anecdotally is that the neurodivergent training seems to be with the staff. The staff that seem to be opting into the neurodivergent training are the ones that are already very aware of neurodivergence and not necessarily the ones that aren't aware of neurodivergence. So we have a problem in this sort of overall, neurodivergent education or professional development for staff. So when the call's talking about staff to professional development, sort of setting a tone of acceptance, it's really hard for us to do that when less than half are actually accessing anything like that. So if staff aren't trained to recognize it, then how inclusive can our services actually be is again a question that came up for me as I was going through this. So again, I'm just trying to throw some provocative questions at you. Here's a third finding that we had. nearly 90% endorse these. It was actually more for clear communication, but for the others, it's a little bit less. But they endorse this. Clear communication was a clear winner in terms of a way to sort of address this. I need to know clearly what it is you're saying because I don't want to have to ask you to repeat yourself 2 or 3 times. So that's a huge one. Free access to materials where the course is concerned. So any sort of information they can have access to, and in multiple formats. They liked multiple formats, so it can either be read to me, a podcast, a handheld document or pamphlet that I can take away with me, something like that. But also solo assessment options is a big one, and I am a culprit for this because in one of my courses there is a group project and I have asked to change it and we can't. Right? And it's really difficult. We do allow students to do it individually, but it's sort of incumbent on them to ask and sort of beg, tell us about it and let's talk about why you'd need to do it by yourself and all those sorts of things. I find that a whole, it's a problem, but that's something that they really need. So universal design for learning, I think we've been battering this around for the last 10 years or so, sort of UDL, and I still think to myself, look, it's a fantastic theory and it's a fantastic idea, but how do we actually go about this? How do we, understand this sort of universal design? It's a very difficult thing for us. So, do we design library learning experience for the average learner? And who gets left out when we actually do? Again, just a question to think about. Is that what we do? There's a couple of questions here. I just want to make sure I read. One thing. Yeah, that is so true. And if you haven't read Renata's questions talking about the sort of changing names, for the units and the support, we've had this like even at my university, it's changed like 3 or 4 times, and I had to even check it. What is it called now? I'm not even sure. And I'm part of the institution, and I'm really on top of this sort of stuff, so it can be a real problem. Because if we can't even get the names right. Right. How are we even supposed to get, think that the students would be able to do it, I can see some already have, this is a reminder to submit oh, yes, if you can submit your questions to the, Q&A, that'd be great. So I've got one more key finding for you, and this is the idea of sort of spaces and sensory considerations. I say this in an office that has some pretty bad fluoro lights right now, and it's not the best environment in order to do these things in. But over 87% want a sensory friendly, quiet room and reduce sensory overload. Now, the problem with this, and this we've talked about this in the research group a fair bit. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And the problem with that is that my idea of comfort is not the idea of comfort of other people, right? One of the things I love when I'm working is music, and very heavy music at that. Other people are not so into that, right? So it can be sort of more bespoke approaches. I think, though, the important thing to note where this is concerned around these sorts of approaches and sort of sensory friendly, when we talk about sensory friendly, is that we need to know who we are and what we need in order to learn. That becomes the key. I see I've got a metalhead in the chat here. Thank you so much for the horns up. If you Google me, I will be a little bit embarrassed, but also a little bit excited. I I think that each person has their own way of sort of managing their sort of sensory overload, but understanding that that sensory overload is not a case of it's just a preference. It's actually an accessibility issue. Okay. So when I walk into a room and it is overwhelming and the rules aren't very clear and I don't know exactly what's going on, which is me to a T, my ability to access that situation in a effective way is compromised. Okay. I don't know whether anyone else is like this. I'm sure this is like this within the room, but I am very much not the sort of person that will want to do sort of social gatherings at work because I don't know what the rules are. I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know where I'm going to sit. What am I going to talk about? How long do I have to be there for? Is there going to be proper drinks or something to eat there? Should I bring my own? Like there's too many rules for me to try to follow and navigate. It's easier for me to say, no, I'm sorry, I just won't be there. Now, in classes, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier. I know what the rules are. I can make it work. So if we've got to understand, I suppose, that these needs are not just, oh, it's just a preference. It's just a preference, just what they like. It's actually limits their ability to access things. That's the problem that we have. So what that looks like in practice, I'm not 100% sure. If the library is a safe space, and that's what we like to call the library, this is a safe space. Do we ever ask ourselves, safe for whom? Who is it actually safe for? Again, just a question that I was scribbling down as I was looking at some of these things. So that's kind of the key findings of the neurodivergent research. I think they're relevant to libraries in general. What I want to move on to now is to talk a little bit about the OER, the textbook. So I will bring what that looks like just on this website here. You can download the book, you can read it, you can do all the things. And I will put the link just there in the chat if anybody would like to have a quick look and see how that goes. But this was a really interesting situation. And I know Alison's here because she said she was going to annoy me in one way or another. And I said I wouldn't expect anything less. I haven't seen it yet, though, so we'll see what happens. But Alison was instrumental in making sure that this book could actually happen. And initially, these were just notes that I was making after each of my classes. I would do that regularly anyway, and it turned into a book. And I spoke to Alison about it, and she said, "Okay, look, let's forge it into something, make it into something. You've found a bit of a gap here in the market in terms of transitioning students." But the thing that really ramped it up was the OER wildcard grant to make this more accessible. So we're trying to make the most accessible book that anyone has ever made. And the way we're going to do that is I'm reading an audio version of it, which I have not finished yet. Sorry, Alison, I'll get there, I'm sure. But I'll be reading it. There will be visual commentary and guided reflections throughout the piece. So we've engaged in some designers in that to help design this a bit better. So we've just used the OER sort of basis at the moment, but it will change. We went to each of the campuses at Fed Uni and filmed students talking about their transition experiences and some of the topics within the book. They're going to feature within the book as well, little snippets for people to watch and hopefully feel like, oh, it's not just me. That's kind of the idea. And we're using some student feedback that we've collected as well in order to inform what we're going to do. We're going to have some quotes and some bits and pieces in there. Now, we've had over, since it was released, 12,000 page views and over 4,000 visitors. Really interestingly, I think this was interesting. In the website, it actually tells you what website they were on before they came to you, so what they were referred by. And there was a few AI websites that was really interesting. There was also a couple of uh, what are they called? VPNs websites. I thought that was interesting too. It's like, well, why are you looking at it through a VPN? But what I suppose has happened, I mean, I've talked to a lot of different enabling programs within Australia about this in order to say, look, this is an enabling textbook to help students. And a lot of them turned around and said, look, this is fantastic. I'm using it now in my course. I think what they've actually done is downloaded it so they have the PDF versions rather than using the online, so we're not getting those stats. But it's a really interesting and fantastic way to look at how we can transfer information in more than one medium to help anybody who has difficulty accessing information in the traditional way. I'm just going to sit here and read. Yes, we can do a printed version. We have a printed version. That's fine if that's your jam. But we're trying to extend it for those students that need to listen or that need some sort of connection with it beyond just the words, right? We don't know how successful this is going to be. We're rolling it out sort of for next year. I think mid next year is sort of our deadline for it. I'm hoping that it comes together really well. Now, if you do have a look at the website, the book itself, there is a link at the bottom of each of them that says, provide feedback. At the moment, I've only really had people saying this was really helpful. Thank you. If you do have some suggestions of improvement, I am always open to hearing any of those things. So feel free. That's enough of a sales pitch. I'm going to stop now. We talk a little bit more about this sort of neurodivergent lens that I think is a really important part. Now, I am very big on strength-based approaches around this. We spend a lot of time in our sort of, even within our neurodivergent community, talking about the things we can't do or don't want to do or find really difficult. We talk about these all the time, but we don't tend to talk about the strengths as often. And I feel this is something that needs to come more to the forefront because I thoroughly believe I could not do my job if I weren't neurodivergent. I could not have gone into so many different schools, been so interested in learning. I mean, learning is, and this is the strange thing, is people always turn around and say, "Oh, well, you've won teaching awards. You know, you must really love teaching." That's actually not true. I love learning. It's just teaching is a great way to access learning, right? I learn about other people, I learn about content, I get challenged, and I love this part of the challenge, right? That's the thing I actually enjoy. I don't think I would be able to do the things that I'm doing if I weren't neurodivergent. And those strengths are things like this. My hyperfocus, when I when I really get into the hyperfocus sort of mind frame, it is a superpower to me. And I mean, I use that word kind of lightly because I know a lot of people don't like hearing this sort of idea of superpower. I just don't have great words for it yet. But I do feel that my ability to focus on things intently and really strongly and be able to pull them apart and look at the patterns and look at the reasonings and solve problems, that is one of the strengths that I bring to any role that I come into, right? Creative ways of actually dealing with things. And I know a lot of people who identify as neurodivergent in the room, you'd feel the same. Um, Libraries and universities are more innovative when neurodiverse ways of thinking are more central rather than sort of sidelined. Now, it's not just libraries though. It's in every aspect. It works well in academia because we have so much freedom, right? If we want to do a research task or do it any way we want, off we go. We just go off and do it. We don't have to ask for permission. I mean, my boss, I mean, he looks at the end of the year at the research things that I've accomplished. He's like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were doing these things." Like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. Oh, that's fantastic. Well done. Not because he's not interested, not because it's just we just go off and do them, right? Now, embracing more neurodivergent ways of thinking that's more outside the box, more about solving problems in creative ways, should be the way that we're doing things. It's not always. Sometimes it is, not always. This has become very important to me of late in talking in spaces about neurodivergence. If it's about us, then it shouldn't be done without us. What I mean by that is if there's no consultation with somebody who is autistic and you're going to run something, that's about autism to support autism, you need to be talking to the people who are autistic, the ones that are going to actually, supposedly benefit or struggle with whatever it is you're going to implement. Now, the thing about this is really interesting. I was talking to one of my Indigenous friends at a conference that we went to. We only ever see each other at a conference. She's beautifully outspoken, and we chat about it often. And she says to me, they always say we don't want to overburden Indigenous people by asking them to do all these things, to join all these committees and do all this stuff. She says to me, she goes, but I don't know one Indigenous person that doesn't want to go out and tell the world what the problems are and talk about it. And I said, yeah, I don't think I know one autistic person that isn't, ready to turn around and say, no, these are the problems. You've got it wrong because da da da. We're very vocal, right? So this sort of, oh, we don't want to overburden you. It's just not a thing. It's not a thing. We're more than happy to talk about it. And trust us to tell you this is too much if it is too much. So this means a co-creation. I am again, and with the university at the moment with a neurodivergent research group, we are I wouldn't say battling, wrestling maybe is a good word with the university to make some of the things that we're talking about part of the policies and part of the systems. Because it's fantastic for me to sit here and say, oh, I did these presentations and we found these foundings and we've published here and we've talked about that and here's the stats and I spoke to the media and all that. So that's fantastic. But if it's not in policy and it's not in procedure, then nothing changes. If I leave here tomorrow, or if anyone from the neurodivergent group, let's say all of us just disband and off we go, what happens to this movement? It disintegrates, turns into nothing. It goes. Hopefully other people take up the mantle, but we know that doesn't always work. I've seen this in schools so often. You have one staff member who's really passionate about something. In one of the schools I worked in, it was ultimate frisbee. It was amazing. It was alternative secondary environment, and she was actually the coach of the all male team of ultimate frisbee for the sort of global team, which was which was really fascinating. So she was really passionate about it, and she had the students. They were doing things like giving up smoking and walking to school so they were more fit. And every lunchtime they went out there and they were playing ultimate frisbee. As soon as she left, that all disappeared, turned into nothing, which is a pity, but understandable. If the things aren't in policies, they aren't in our systems, then the change does not stick. So that's really important. That's the next driver that I've been looking at. So here's my question. What would libraries look like if the neurodivergent perspective led design, decision-making, innovation, rather than being an afterthought? I'm not suggesting it is at the moment, by the way. It's just a provocative question. But I am happy to be challenged at the same time. You turn around and say, well, you got some assumptions there, Leigh. I don't like them very much. I'm more than happy for you to do it, to talk to me like that. So what can actually be done? Let's talk about some of these things. I mean, I've already hit about this. Remember your powers as the librarians. You set the tone for the whole of the university. There's plenty of research to actually suggest that that's the case. So remember that power. Remember that in each of your interactions. Like whenever you're talking to students, whenever you're talking to staff, management, anyone like that, like remember that idea. Co-creation and collaboration should be a mainstay. This is what we need to be doing more often. It should be less top down. Now, I know I'm going to be speaking to some libraries and not others, because other libraries will be like, yeah, this is something we're already doing, but there's a lot that still aren't. At least this is what we're hearing in the research. So co-creation, collaboration. Environment is really important. It needs to be conducive to people to access work, access learning. Okay. Now, what that looks like at each university is going to be somewhat bespoke. There is no broad brush stroke that says this is how they all should be. Okay, so that can be different. You need to know the community that you're in. So, for instance, we have three campuses that we have at Fed Uni here. One is at Manhattan, one is in Berwick, and the other one is in Gippsland. Now, the profile of students that come into those different universities is completely different. Somewhat similar between Manhattan and Gippsland, because Manhattan is in Ballarat and tends to service a lot of the students who are sort of regional. Yeah, there's SMB as well. Sorry, Jason. I always throw that in, throw SMB. I used to work at SMB too, so figure that out. There is SMB campus as well, but they service the same students, so we'll leave it at that. But SMB is very much the TAFE section of the university. So but Berwick is very different. We have a very different cohort in Berwick. A lot of students with, English as an additional language, or different cultural differences and those sorts of things. So, what the library support system, what the environments are going to look like at these different sites, will change based on the need of the people who are there. This is my School of Mines Ballarat, spot on. This is my overall argument about environment and professional development. Now, I will say to you, there's professional development and there's professional development. It's very interesting. Some of them I've been to, I've gone, oh, that's probably not the way we do it anymore. And others I've gone to, wow, that's a fascinating idea. My recommendation is to collect them all like Pokemon. As much as you can, as much as your boss and that will allow. I know I'm running low on time, so I'm going to try to whiz through these last few points. But what else can be done? We're talking about sensory friendly spaces. Look, let's face it, fluoro lights are not good for anybody. Realistically, they don't work even for neurotypical people. They're not great. Just to say, oh, that's a bit bright, and it's just they shouldn't be there. If we can get away with it, it's better. Assistive technologies that can actually help learning. Now, the debate is out as to what that actually looks like. Is that AI? Is it not AI? I don't know, and I'm not going to go too much into that. I can't comment on it, but that's not probably worth it. But that's something to think about. Um, Tailored library instruction, we have this at our university, and I take advantage of it every semester. I have people from the library talk to my students, and it's brilliant. They talk specifically to my FAST students, which are my enabling students, and every semester we talk about how can we make it even better, and it's really, really good. Signage and instructions are really good. To assume that students understand what each space is for, particularly neurodivergent students, um, is a bit of a mistake. I walk into rooms and go, okay, so what do we do here? What's this room for? I actually, I'll say this directly to anybody who's from Fred Uni. I went up to the top floor at the university at the moment where all the books were, and I was very confused because it's all gone. It's all empty now, right? So, signage is really good. You might think it's sort of like, you know, telling someone how to suck eggs a little bit, but it does actually really help a neurodivergent mind. Here you can study, here you can do this, here it is quiet, here it is, any of those sorts of things. And anything that can be a predictable routine for students and staff can be really good. If you're going to have a staff meeting, try to have it at the same time, right? And try to have similar things, try to have similar agenda items, all that sort of stuff. And I've got one more for you. So these actually came out from Boyer. I'll actually bring them out. These were just things that they were sort of saying to university libraries that these are things you should be doing or could be helpful. So flexible borrowing, again, our university library already has that, and I know a lot already have that. That sort of on-demand assistance. I don't know about this one. I understand why they're saying it, but I sort of feel like there needs to be like a student help center, not necessarily in the library, but the libraries have become it, unfortunately. But that's one that they said. Resource curation, so helping people find the things that they need to find for staff. That's brilliant. Sensory zones, we've talked about that ad nauseum. Signage, we've talked about that as well. And comfort amenities, what that might look like for you might be different depending on your cohort. Now, yes, it is a lovely shout out. I didn't even intend to do that for Fair Duty, but it's happened that way. I do have this last. I don't know if we have time. Do we have time? Um, if you would like, I'll put this in the chat. This is just a word cloud. Anything, any word that would describe inclusion for you. I really do hope that I've done two things today. One, at least, we do have time. Fantastic. So if you can go onto that word cloud and just put a word or two on there, that'd be fantastic. But I hope I've done two things. One of them is I hope that I've at least held up a bit of a mirror as to the way libraries have evolved and changed. And I hope that I've also asked a few questions that make you think a little bit about what is the role of libraries, the ever-changing role of libraries, and how might we challenge some of the things that are actually happening at the moment? Um, because again, I said this a few times in this, you guys set the tone for us. You very much do, and it's very important, I feel, extremely important for us to be able to figure out where we're supposed to go as educators. Um, by a central point that is the library. Whilst the library sort of environment shifts and changes, the library is still the central part. It still exists and it's going to stay there because of what we need for you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this here, I'm going to present it so we can see. Oh, is it going to present it in a different screen? No, it isn't. So you'll find here you probably already know how a word cloud works, but the words that are bigger have been written more often, and the words that are smaller usually only written once or twice. So respect, flexible, kindness, accepted, and what have I missed that keeps moving? Belonging is the one right in the middle. Belonging is actually the one that's said the most. Belonging is such a powerful word. What it means to actually feel like we belong within, while we're learning. I do want to pull out a few here. This fluidity, this agency, empowerment. Eye contact is an interesting one. Flexibility. What else have we got here? Rainbows. Love it. Uh, freedom. Safe. Ah, I'm sorry, guys, but it actually feels like I'm presenting to a bunch of people that didn't need me to present to them to realize that this was the way to go. Hopefully, I've given you some credence to some of the ideas that you clearly already have. But I do want to put my email address on here because if anybody wants to talk about the textbook or any of my research findings or any of those sorts of things, my PhD or anything, I'll put it in the chat as well if you'd like to copy it. I am always up to have a chat about these things. Um, I do think that the only way we get anywhere is together. And working in collaboration is the way to go. But I do hope that this has helped to sort of frame some of this stuff for you. See the values in OERs as well and how we can make them more accessible for students. But also, have a look at some of the practical things that we can do in order to improve the learning experience of students, but also the work experience of us, so yeah, but this is my list of references if you'd like to look them up. Um, I think that's all I've got. I think that's where I am. I hope that's around the time. I've sort of lost track of when I was supposed to finish
All good. We're
talking.
keeping time, Leigh. So
Oh,
thank you so much for
fantastic.
that
I could
presentation.
stop sharing
Very,
now.
if you like, yep.
Yeah.
Very much appreciate you speaking with us and sharing what we already know at Federation University of just what you bring to the university and to students is I'm confident that the CRIG community has enjoyed what you've had to say and
I'm glad.
enjoyed your provocative questions to us as well as librarians that we
Good, good.
so if you're ready now, if you want to take a sip of anything, we're about to fly into some questions if you'd
Let's do it.
like to. So I'm just going to go through the questions on the Q&A function in the order of upvotes. So the first one is, do you have any advice on how to manage the misconception that meeting needs through reasonable adjustments is quote unquote special treatment?
Oh, I mean that's loaded, isn't it? Isn't it? I think realizing that the pendulum has to swing really far before it comes back into the center is the important part here. Now, I think about this whenever we think of, and I think of my sister-in-law and my friends and everything, who are gay or gender fluid or anything like that or non-binary. Um, Now, I'm not saying that this is easy for them, but I'd say it's a lot more accepted now than when I started teaching. A lot more accepted now. When I started teaching, there were a lot of people who would never disclose. Now I hear teachers disclosing. So that pendulum needs to swing like crazy, and we use words like special consideration, and we use these sorts of terms of difference, and sort of looking at how how this the way we'd like it to be. And yeah, it comes with a lot of discomfort. So my advice would be write out the terminology for the time. I know it irks us and I know it's really uncomfortable, but we need to write out the terminology till eventually it just becomes something that we do. I know that doesn't give people, the warm and fuzzies because it's like, well, how long is that going to be? And it's like, how long is a piece of string? But I think that this is how change happens. It's slow, it's grinding, and it can be really arduous. But yeah, that would be my best advice. Eventually, we will have terminologies and words and things for this sort of stuff that won't include special consideration, won't include that sort of stuff. We will move into a space of that is just what we do, but we're not there yet.
Thank you
Does
for that.
that answer the question okay? I hope it does.
I think it did perfectly. So, next
Great.
question is, you said that if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent
Mm.
person. Um, the question is, what does a genuinely inclusive library look like that's inclusive for everyone?
This again, another moving feast. It's really hard. It's really hard to sort of answer this succinctly. So, I guess I'm gonna break it down. I mean, there are some broad brush strokes that we can look at. Like the fluoro lights, these sorts of things. Signs up in places to make that very clear. Knowing where I need to go in order to get the support. Walking to this space, that space, whatever. They're the sort of general broad brush strokes. But to me, inclusion is the same way I teach. I get to know my students. Like I know who they are. And this is an important part of me being able to engage with them and actually impart the knowledge. This is the reason that, you win awards, because at the end of it, I can tell the student, this is how far you've gone. This is what it looked like for you. These are your next challenges, da, da, da. So my advice around this is bespoke approaches are the way to go next. Getting to know who it is that you're getting through the door. Now, bespoke approaches can work when you have a general idea of the types of students that you have. So if we have a lot of students who are first in family, well, that's going to frame the way we're going to give support. If we have a majority of students who aren't, then that's going to probably change it as well. So it is really difficult. That's right, to know 75,000 students. And I suppose we're kind of, I don't know whether this is lucky or not. I mean, a Fed uni, we're a small university, it's a lot easier. But there are ways to sort of get to know, cohorts in a general sort of format that makes our support better. Okay, so little surveys, little bits and pieces. You'll notice the 3-2-1 bridge that I did at the start. I'm actually trying to get to know what sort of wording you use, what sort of metaphors that you would talk about, and even looking at this, like I'm seeing these things, I'm looking back at it, and you can still look at it if you open it, like open door, a portal to everywhere, embracing all genres. I'm starting to get an idea. Okay, now I know who you are. Get these little bits of surveys out there and get these little tests to have an understanding of who they might be. 75,000 students, it's really difficult. Don't get me wrong. But, the vocal minority might be the ones that help you guide into that.
Great. I've probably got time for one more question to sneak in. Apologies for the ones we didn't get to, but you can, if you
email them to me if you like.
Yep.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for advocating for ourselves within a workplace as like a staff and a student and as a library worker as well? This person says that they find themselves constantly over-explaining and trying to fight for people to understand their experience as an autistic woman. Any thoughts to sort of end on that?
The first thing I'd say is I'm really sorry that that's been your experience. It's not great. It can be really challenging and really difficult, especially when you feel like I've explained this already. Why do I have to explain it again? So my advice is over a couple of things. I think having meetings, particularly with anybody you're going to be working with, your bosses, even your boss's boss, talking about these are the things that I need and people need to understand. Rallying sort of grassroots support is really helpful. So it makes you feel a lot less alone. It also makes you feel like you're not the only one telling this story. I mean, particularly within universities, I've said this a few times, 80% of people who work at university are neurodivergent and 20% are just in denial. Like we tend to sort of congregate together, like find your people within your workplace and use that to your benefit as best you can. The long-term goal, though, is change within policy, change within procedure. From now on, this is how this should be. It's going to take a long time to get there. Look, keep fighting the good fight. I know this is exhausting and it's difficult, but also try to approach it more from a strength-based positive perspective as much as possible. I know that's hard, especially when the only time you seem to be bringing it up is when things aren't done the way you've asked them to be done. But if we just flip it, for instance, oh no, I actually work so much more effectively if I get to, is a much better sentence. And also, when you're advocating for students and those sorts of things, the conversation that we need to start with, when someone says, oh, I'm autistic or something like that, please start the conversation with, oh, how does that present for you? is a fantastic way for them to open up. They'll either say, well, it means that sometimes I miss deadlines, sometimes I get hyper focused, sometimes I don't sleep well, sometimes, whatever. Or they might turn around to you and say, oh, I don't really know. In which case your response can either be, oh, thanks for letting me know those things. I'm going to keep those in mind as we're going through. Or, well, how about we try to figure this out together? And in either way, it's a supportive talk. So starting with the sentence, how does that present for you? It's not judging. I'm not having a go. I just want to know, how do you navigate this world, knowing this about yourself. Hopefully that's helpful. This is a really difficult space, though.
Thank you so much. That's all we really have time for. We've kind of shortened the break to get that little last insight in. So thank you so much. And on behalf of the committee, we thank you so much for talking today. We're just going to have a really quick break. We're going to get started again with our next speaker shortly after 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Daylight Time and 10 a.m. if you're in Queensland. So the applause is already coming in, but thanks again,
Thank you
Leigh.
all. Thank you all so much. Thanks for being here and thanks for listening to what I have to say. I very much appreciate that. And please hit me up if you have any more questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. Cheers.
And see everyone after the break.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had the time to have a stretch or get a cup of coffee or tea as we have another keynote to go. Like this first one, if you have any questions during the next presentation, please submit them through the Zoom Q&A function and I will facilitate the Q&A afterwards. I'm very excited to introduce today's second speaker, Dr. Amanda White OAM. She's the Deputy Associate Dean of Education at the University of Technology, Sydney Business School. She's been recognised at a national level for her innovation in assessment and the learner experience. As a winner of the Teaching Excellence Award by the Australian Awards for University Teaching and a medal in the Order of Australia. Amanda is especially passionate about open textbooks and OER as a tool to support equity and student engagement in learning. She joins us today to explore the transformative potential of academic library partnerships in supporting teaching and learning. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Kate. And hi to everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully that is working for everybody. So welcome everyone, and I hope you've had a great day. I caught the tail end of Leigh's piece there. I am also neurodivergent, so hello to all the ADHD late diagnosed high achieving eldest daughters out there who are probably in the same situation I'm in. I'd like to acknowledge that today I'm coming to you from Darug country out in northwestern Sydney, and I'm excited to be talking about the power of partnership, how academics and open education librarians can supercharge student learning. So I would originally considered myself a bit of a failed academic. I did a PhD. I struggled to produce research out of my PhD due to a number of reasons. And then I went from a balanced position to education focused. And that's where my love for open education and resources really came about. But I teach lots of students. My current subject has 1,800-ish students in first semester and 600 in second semester. So I'm always looking at ways to figure out how we can supercharge student learning and support equity. I'm at UTS, and UTS is an institution that prides itself on trying to widen participation through equity programs, but as well as support and transition within curriculum. And I have been teaching for quite a long time, over 2 decades. And one of the most common things I will ask, or I asked in the beginning, used to be, how did we go with this week's readings? And it would be crickets. Had you done the readings? It just seemed very dense and inaccessible. So having had that question many, many years ago, I wanted to delve into why students didn't do readings, didn't do the preparation, or didn't do homework. As an accountant, and I do apologize, I am an accountant by trade, and now an academic, I always thought, like, this is an investment. Going to university is an investment. Why don't you build on that? But I didn't really understand why students didn't do readings from textbooks. Quite often it was that they didn't have time, and that's even more so the case now with students having to work more hours. As we widen participation, the number of students who really just think about going to university and not working is very limited. Many didn't have a copy of the textbook because it was too expensive. And this came out in Sarah Lambert's work when she had a fellowship or a grant from NESHE that talked about open resources as a real equity game changer for students. The library copy was not available. So at my university with 48,000 students, often with a textbook that we would prescribe, we might have 5 copies for thousands of students. So maybe that wasn't available or it wasn't accessible. It might have been hard to read or understand, so language that is quite dense. And I know as librarians, quite often it's common to have students come up to the library desk and go, I don't understand what this means. Like, what does this actually say? All this academic language. And I find that sometimes we sort of get caught up in textbooks being highly academic as a demonstration of our expertise, but not really suitable for the purpose of education. And that the textbook might be hard to navigate or align with the course structure. Usually textbooks are written in a way that is for a standardized course. If you're doing something different in a different order, slightly different structure, things might just not work out. And so some of the comments that I've had and also that came out of Sarah Lambert's work in regards to affordability was students saying, I did not expect textbooks to be as expensive as they are. A lot of students said, I just don't use them. I use YouTube and resources that I could find online. Now, of course, they're using generative AI as a tutorial tool. The cost of a textbook has led me occasionally not purchasing them, and I suffered with my classes as a result. The financial burden placed on students, especially young people, to be able to fork out this kind of money as a requirement makes things a lot more complex. And then students, of course, using illegal copies of textbooks that they find on the internet. And so textbooks have been one of these real battlegrounds of education where we're trying to figure out how do we support student learning. And students go, well, I can't afford the textbook. It feels inaccessible to me. There are a whole lot of reasons why often students are just not using textbooks that are prescribed. So why create open textbooks or open education resources? And there's a really big, we have a big change coming in higher education. So I'm sure most people here have heard of the Accords or had a read of the summary report or the final report, but the government is planning a massive increase in the number of people with university degrees to meet the needs of a future Australia. And part of that plan includes how do we increase participation from equity groups through enabling programs, through pathways. But of course, the big challenge once we have people into university from a wider range of the population is that we know they struggle. They don't know how to use a library as effectively as they could. They don't instinctively understand referencing or academic norms. There's all this hidden curriculum within going to university that you might not understand if you're the first in your family, the first in your community to go to university, or even the first to go to a different field maybe than what your other family members have studied. So the sector has a lot of work to do to ensure that we better support these students when they enroll in higher education. And one of the ways that I'm really passionate about that is through open education resources, especially open textbooks. That means that students are better able to engage with the materials. They don't have to worry about that extra cost, and then hopefully improve their student learning outcomes. Now, for me, I'd always started with creating content on YouTube first. That was because I was inherently not lazy, but I was trying to be efficient. Students always came with the same questions, so I thought if I could explain these questions online, then maybe they'd come with different questions for me. But YouTube really is an enabling factor in education. If you can't understand maybe your subject coordinator or lecturer teaching something, maybe you could find someone on YouTube who speaks in a language that's more accessible to you, that gives examples that might be in a better understanding. I have lots of neurodiverse or neurodivergent students, and often they say, Amanda, what's the best way to study? I'm like, try YouTube, try and find somebody who's talking about their lived experiences as a student, and see if you can find someone that exhibits similar traits and how your neurodiversity presents for you. And that can be a way to help, increase your ability to study at university. So as we move further and further down the path with the Accords, I think open resources are going to be critically important. Now, we see this in government policy in some particular parts of the world. So the state of California in the United States, the state-run university or college system mandated that all of the textbooks that were to be prescribed had to be open access, because they realized that by providing open access resources, again, that supercharges student learning. You're not missing that foundational anchor. But for an academic, writing a textbook is a daunting task. Where do I start? What is the style and tone of the book? How long will this take? And how will I get it in front of an audience? Academic textbook writing is a little bit of a racket, I feel. You need to know the right person to get in on an existing textbook, perhaps make your way up the list of authors until you're the senior author. But as somebody who has written resources that have been commercially published, for the amount of effort I put in, I make very little money for that. And so for me, if I was going to make $1,000 from writing a textbook for all these students, why not just put that money back into making the textbook free? So it can be a really daunting task for academics to think about, what will this involve? And then how do I get in front of an audience? And this is where librarians are the lifesavers here. So this is my university librarian, Michael Gonzalez, but I have a team of people at UTS that helped push me down the path to be supportive, to move into open access resources and help write 2 open education textbooks. So initially, one of our learning designers who's done a PhD in open education resources, Dr. Mays Fataya, had run a panel. I'm like, I love this idea of an open textbook. I looked at a Pressbooks platform. I think it was $2,000 to publish a book. I applied for a grant. I didn't get the grant. And then I thought, where am I going to get $2,000 from? So I went onto Twitter at the time. This was before Twitter was the situation we see it in now. But I went onto Twitter and I said, does anyone have suggestions on how I might fund $2,000 for this textbook platform so I can create a textbook and make it free? And my librarian was on Twitter and he said, Amanda, $2,000? I'll pay for that. No worries whatsoever. And he was telling me that to buy the digital license for the textbook that was previously used was costing them tens of thousands of dollars US for maybe only 5 licenses. So $2,000 for an investment in an open textbook was a really great bargain for him. So how does my institution support open education authors? They cover part of the open textbook platform cost. Either we pay the direct cost or we are a part of the CAUL, C-A-U-L, Pressbooks platform. They provide great graphic design support. I'm an accountant. I am not very good with picking out what colors work best and how to take my sort of images I create in PowerPoint and turn them into something a little bit nicer. So we had one of the university's graphic designers supporting us. They provided us with editing support and copyright checks. Anytime I had a general OER question, I want to put this video in, I'm looking at this newspaper article, what could we do? And they also provided assistance in organizing and sorting out peer review. So I wouldn't have known, and sort of later on I found out there were all these steps, but our OER team, or our open access team, really helped just break down all of the different steps to make it much more achievable. And they knew who to ask or how to get the right information. So the book that we created is called Accounting and Accountability. It is based entirely off a first year accounting subject. And it was really an interesting process to both create the book. We adapted books that we had found that were Creative Commons and open access overseas for the Australian market. But we also managed to do things like embed Indigenous graduate attributes. So, in terms of the benefits we've seen for us at the university, students are actually reading the book and coming to class prepared. It's so exciting to see students go, "Oh, I've done the work." And I said, look, it was free. The book was easy to read. It was online. I could download it. It could go into an ebook reader. So they were super happy to have a book. And as part of accessibility, we try and do as much in universal design for learning as possible. At one point then, I recorded an audio version of the book so that students who maybe worked part-time or worked in the evening stocking shelves. It's usually students who work stocking shelves places that say, Amanda, I listened to the ebook as I'm putting things away on the shelves at Woolies or packing online orders, but they're coming to class way more prepared. What's great about open resources, of course, is that our textbook matches our curriculum exactly. So we are the first text that has actually included anything about Indigenous perspectives on accounting and global perspectives on accounting, and recognizing that accounting is going to be a really important tool for Indigenous communities in relation to self-determination, and that accounting had actually been used to the detriment of Indigenous peoples in the past. So for us, it was really important to be able to showcase that with authentic Indigenous voices and content. It was diverse and inclusive. So the previous book that we had used before I came on board and took over the subject, in the businesses, because this is an accounting textbook, the female owners or female identifying owners only ever owned dress shops and cake shops. And the male owners owned everything else, every other type of business that was available. So I wanted to make sure that I was diverse and inclusive. And I tried to bust some of those stereotypes and include those Indigenous perspectives. And it's another way for students to hear my voice. I think Leigh was talking about like really getting to know students. That is really difficult for me. I have 1,800. And I don't actually get to teach tutorials for them. So I teach large workshops where there's many, many students. I get to meet some when they have a problem or they need support. But this was another way to write authentically. It was a way that I could write in my natural voice, not in a really academic way, where students could see my enthusiasm. Apparently, when I'd written some work for a commercial textbook publisher, they're like, Amanda, we can't have exclamation points in a textbook to describe how excited you are about something. So it was nice to have some of that freedom for students to be able to hear my voice and to use examples that related to me and my interests. It was a great way for us to engage in social justice by removing one of the small barriers in relation to participation at university, because as we widen our participation and we engage in partnership programs to bring low SES and first-in-family students to university, especially if you're doing a law degree or a combined law degree, textbooks are very expensive. So this is just one way. We think we've saved students close to $2 million over the last 3 years that we've been in play with an open education textbook. It also improved student learning outcomes by giving everyone access. So it wasn't just students who could afford the book. I also said to students, you can take the book, you can put it into a translator if that helps. And we've had academics from more developing countries who say, look, Amanda, we have to ship textbooks from the United States. They're very expensive. I'm like, well, hey, use an open textbook. Translate it, adjust all the examples to fit your particular cultural needs. And it's been really great to see more people studying accounting as a result of that. And we can make adjustments more easily than with a publisher-produced text. I think with our previous text, I think I had found the same error in the last 5 versions. I think I'd sent the error to them 5 times. So it's great. Students sometimes provide suggestions. They say, Amanda, this sentence is really clunky. Like, it was made sense to me, but it didn't make sense to them. So having these this ability and this control means that we can react. We can get on the front foot when there might be a really interesting topic, something related to change that we want to ensure that we're teaching our students. A big complaint, I guess, about university from industry is you're teaching what we wanted 5 years ago. So this is also a way to ensure that we're always up to date and creating new resources. We also do some partnerships with students. So we've seen some work at UTS where students have partners as authors, especially when they're in their later years or they're working on specializations. We've had students as peer reviewers and copy editors. So those were paid internships. Students as graphic designers or CSS when we've needed some slightly more technical terms. And then students as learning activity designers. So once we knew we could embed H5P into our open resources. We've had quite a few students say, "Oh, Amanda, I've got a great idea for one of those H5P things." So asking them to contribute and then attributing them as well whenever we do include student work has been really, really important in our journey. And they feel quite proud as well. Now, what are the barriers to doing all this? Academics have very busy workloads, and the barriers are typically time. So I don't know if I'm going to have time to do this. Could I use time when I'm on a sabbatical? The other barrier with the scale that I have down there on the bottom is sort of the improper balance I feel sometimes between teaching and research. So a lot of people think, oh, writing a textbook's not going to help me get promoted. I'm going to do my research instead. So that's another barrier to overcome. And then also the writing process. As somebody who is ADHD inattentive, sitting down to write a book was a really scary, daunting process. I knew I wanted to do it. I was highly motivated, but I was stuck in that paralysis analysis sort of phase. And so even adapting made a really big difference. And I took a lot of notes and I kept a timer every time I was working on the book. So when we adapted an existing book and we had to write a few new chapters, but all new examples, changes for international accounting versus Australian accounting, it probably took me somewhere between 80 and 100 hours to build the text. Now, I was doing this at the same time I was building the subject, and the subject was brand new. So I was building a plane as I was flying a plane. So I was maybe 2 weeks ahead of the students in writing the textbook chapter, creating the learning content for our learning management system, building H5P activities, building practice activities, and then building a class activity. So the beauty of that in an open textbook is that students said, "Oh, Amanda, last week you had this great example, and that example was so clear. Could you make more examples like that?" And it meant that we could be really flexible and really responsive. And my students were my real-time focus groups. I'd come into class and go, "How was the textbook last week? How was the textbook this week?" So it is a big barrier to work. So for you all as library staff who are that important partnership link, what are my tips for library staff to encourage open education resource production? The first one is to seek out education or teaching focused academics that are well regarded by colleagues and students. We do have some education focused staff who this was the only job available. They're not really interested in education, but if you'll know the ones who are really keen on supporting their students and innovating, and quite often they will have a KPI or a performance measure that is more closely aligned. And so education and teaching focused academics might have a little bit more bandwidth to be able to engage in open education resource production. You might even also start small. So say, "Oh, like this was a great assignment," or "This was a great activity," or "This was a great piece of experimentation. Would you think about publishing it?" find existing open education material. So when I started, I just was like, okay, I want to do this, but I feel super overwhelmed. And it was my open access team that said, actually, Amanda, we've found these other repositories that have resources that could be adaptable. And so that was much less daunting than starting from scratch. I wanted to make sure that I highlighted the benefits of creating something open as a way to demonstrate discipline-specific expertise. This is playing to that idea of how could an open education resource support you in getting promoted? And that's always the card that academic staff are thinking about. Will this help me with my promotion? Is this strategic? And quite often, promotion criteria will say something like, what are you doing that demonstrates your command of the field, that you have this discipline-specific expertise? And so creation of something could be a really great way to do that. And then linked to that is that there are lots of tracking metrics. So in most open education resource platforms, there is some way to check who is using these. Were these mostly students? What countries did they come from? So that's another great way to demonstrate impact of work. So it's not just that you're doing particular things on a checklist for academic promotion. At the majority of places, it is what are you doing and what is the impact that it's having? Which means you might sort of work together perhaps with some learning designers to say, okay, if we're implementing open education resources, what additional data collection could we have that would help us see whether there's any impact of these resources? And that could be as small as student perceptions. I really appreciated that the textbook was free and it was accessible and I could look at it any time, right through to, evaluation of individual topics. And then the last one is just to offer support. So whether that's through perhaps some copywriting or connecting them with people, that's really important. Now, this is good when you know that, okay, we want to get some open education resources out there. These are the people I'm going to approach. But probably I should have made this the slide before. How do we actually start by building awareness? Because most academics won't know that what open education is. So how do you get that concept in front of people? I find academics love to yap. I don't know whether that comes from our neurodivergence or something else, but individual connections over a beverage or a general chat is always a great way to start the conversation of like, how are things going? How are you finding your existing textbook? Oh, geez, I really hate my existing textbook. Oh, and happiness is a great way to act as an inroad to what if you did something like an open education resource. We have Open Education Week activities at my institution, but at institutions that don't, you might say, oh, look, I've seen these great things happening for Open Education Week at other places, or I saw this great recording and I thought of your subject and this particular problem. So a lot of my work as Deputy Associate Dean is influencing the practice of others, which means understanding what their practices are and then trying to find little ways that we could provide that support through resourcing. Find people already creating OE in your institution and creating and facilitating connections. So that could be simply a little Zoom meeting where people can meet each other or have a chat together, showcasing existing creators. So how could you get existing creators on the front page of the library website as a bit of a showcase, or the library's Instagram, or talk about them somehow on LinkedIn or somewhere else? And people might go, oh, recognition. How could I get into that game? There's also a great comment in the chat that OERs are not just books. So it is definitely true that tackling a whole book can be super daunting. So maybe you might make a case study that you're going to make available. There's lesson plans, activities, diagrams. It says there they've got a link to the OER Commons. There's a couple of different OER libraries that I like to look at for things. But even when I do slides for presentations, if I've got something that I've developed that I think is pretty cool, quite often I will put the slides for the presentation up, but also make them Creative Commons and OER, so that if people wanted to take a diagram and adapt it, then they could. So in terms of my experiences, oh geez, and I'm running ahead of time, which will mean we have lots more time for extra questions. In terms of feedback from our students, and we have this in 2 first-year accounting subjects for students. It's so great to have a book that they just need to follow. It reduces cognitive load for a lot of students to try and figure out which chapter of the book is this relevant. A question I get a lot is everything in the textbook accessible? And if you control your own textbook, you can say, yes, everything I teach in the textbook is accessible. For one student, they said it was a new experience in the red box. I'm very grateful as it made it more accessible, both physically and financially. It is digital, but we do have abilities for students to print their book if they wanted a printed one for themselves. In the black box, the textbook was written really well as it was easy to read and understand. It linked directly to the content and lecture videos. I was never lost or confused as to what page or chapter I was supposed to be using. Less confusion means hopefully more learning. Now, learning does need to have some friction because learning needs to be hard in some ways, but it shouldn't be hard in trying to figure out what do I need to learn this week? What is the requirement? What do I have to do? And it was well written and easy to follow. Being in the batch of 24 I've used within my education, this has been one of the better sources of information. So for us, an open education resource has been a really great way to make sure that students have an enjoyable learning experience. They're all on the same page, and that we're supercharging our approaches to equity and supporting equity students by ensuring that everybody has access to a textbook. Now, I haven't managed to convince other first year coordinators to go down these paths yet. I guess when I always play the little mental game, if I was vice chancellor, what would I do? If I was dean of the faculty, what would I do? But I think that libraries play such an important part. I wouldn't be where I am without my great learning design team who are in the open education space, as well as my university library staff. And big shout out to Helen Chan at UTS as well, who supports us in our open access approaches. And they can even, sometimes link, oh, look, I saw this great open access thing that came through my desk in a slightly different field. Could this be applicable? So they're a really great connection point. So I went through that a lot quicker than I thought I would when I practiced. So I'm looking forward to having lots of discussion and lots of questions with everybody as well. And oh, hang on. If anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn to chat, I'll also put my LinkedIn details in the chat. Usually you just click the 3 little dots and go to more to select a connection request. And I'll love to chat with people more about open education resources, or if you have somebody at your institution that is looking to explore this and they want to talk to somebody, I'm always happy to do that as well. So I will stop sharing. And Kate, are there any questions in the Q&A?
Amanda, there are quite a few questions in the Q&A, so we will get stuck into some. What was the one thing you'd fix first if we started the textbook ecosystem over?
Ooh, okay. So if we started the textbook ecosystem over, textbook publishing should be not for profit, right? However you structure it, whether that's open or whether it's closed in the publishing system, it feels like even for the people I know that author on textbooks, put in significant amount of hours. But as an accountant, when you look at where does all the profit go, the profit goes to textbook publishers, but that's not really benefiting students. They don't have the same commitment to equity, I think, as universities do. So I would make every publisher not for profit would be the way that we would start. And then, think about how do we provide needs-based pricing on textbooks. I know that some textbook publishers have gone to a monthly subscription cost for as many books as you want in their particular library. Which only works if the institution weds itself to a particular publisher or that particular field of study weds itself to a particular publisher. Um, but I think, yeah, that not-for-profit aspect and thinking about how we could turn what we already do into more resources so that students have more choice under that UDL type approach as well.
Mm, mm.
And I'm friends with lots of textbook publishers. One of my great friends does work for a very large publisher. She's Amanda, I love what you do. It's not great for our business, but for students and learning, and that's what we're here for in higher education.
Exactly, exactly. So how did you measure success in a way that you could translate it to the library or other academics to encourage adoption of existing OERs or creation of OERs?
Great question. And look, what gets measured gets managed. And so for me, when I was, applying for promotion, and applying for, just internal recognition, one of the things we looked at was even, how many students actually clicked on the book. Where did they come from? We could see that a lot of them were local. But even just knowing once we started promoting the resource online, we received strange emails from people we never knew who said, I'm a student studying in this country. This book made so much sense for me. So part of it is that qualitative evidence, but part of it is also quantitative. We taught the same content as we did before with a new textbook, with an open resource. And we did things like asking tutors to informally rate how well prepared students appeared to be when you asked them about basic concepts or you had those discussions. We used survey data over the first 3 semesters of, did you read the textbook this week? How did you find the textbook? Are you able to do some of these basic questions? So we used quite a lot of metric data, and in our learning management system, when we embedded the link for the textbook website, every single time I put a tracker on it. So usually it's your marketing team that know how to put a tracker on a link, but there are lots of ways that you can do it. But then we could track of the 1,600 students. I couldn't tell exactly which students were clicking on the link, but I knew that the textbook in a week would have 2,500 link clicks. So
Right.
that's lots of students clicking on the link, and then hopefully looking at the book. So we used quite a lot of different measures. And yeah, there's also metrics within the Pressbooks platform related to like the amount of time, the amount of repeat visitors that come back, geographic regions, time of the day. Surprisingly, lots of our students were looking at the book at like 2 o'clock in the morning, the day before class, which is fine as long as they're doing it before class. I'm really happy.
2 in the morning, wow.
I'm old. I can't, like, 9 o'clock is my bedtime. So I live on grandma hours. But yes, to be young again.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So what would you say to academics who are worried about the additional workload or who don't think writing an OER could benefit their academic progression, sorry?
Yeah, absolutely. So with workload, this was something that I negotiated with my head of department. And it was like, well, I want to do this, and this is how much time I think it's going to take. And I received a small amount of workload relief. So instead of teaching a certain number of face-to-face hours, I got about 1 hour of relief each week to work on the book. But for me, the thing that makes the biggest difference, it's not the external recognition for other academics who write to me and say, oh, Amanda, like we were looking for something like this, or we used a particular chapter, or we used a particular element. It was the achievement of students. Right. So in our feedback survey, we do have a question that's standard in our feedback survey about what they thought about the textbook and the fact the textbook was free. And just reading those comments every single term, students would share, like, for some subjects, it was buy groceries or buy a textbook. So those good feelings are a really good part. But the other aspect is that there's not widespread adoption in the open access space. It's not something that we see everywhere. So if you're looking to innovate and do something new in your area, or new to your field or new to your faculty, quite often internal teaching and learning awards or citations are based on how is this new and innovative. So this can be a way where you can say, you're going to break ground here. This is how you might position yourself as an expert. And as students look, students do get dissatisfied with quality of teaching. But in the old days, if you were dissatisfied with the quality of teaching, you might try a different institution. But now students go, well, I'll stay at the same institution, but what I'll do is I'll look to YouTube or I'll look to TikTok or I'll find something somewhere else. So creating an open education resource, especially if you might then later, create some slides to go with it, perhaps see if your university will allow you to post the lecture or created content that goes with that under a similar type of license. This could also demonstrate that, hey, other people find the way that you teach something and the way that you explain something really useful as well. So that student feedback as well as that external feedback. I've been recognized in the weirdest of places, like a hotel in a regional area in Indonesia, and someone came up to me and said, "Excuse me, but are you Amanda White from Amanda Loves to Audit on YouTube?" And I was like, "Yes." They said, "Oh, I used all of your resources to become professionally qualified as an accountant. And when I was at university, I told all my friends, can we get a selfie?" So those sorts of things are, create these very weird, unusual interactions. But education is this place where on social media, you can share about what you're doing and you'll find that audience of students who just maybe are not connecting with their existing coordinator or convener or lecturer, but this just provides more students with more opportunities. And especially as we widen participation and we see more and more equity students, that is going to be so much more important. And linking back to Leigh's discussion around neurodivergence as well, it just means that learning is not one size fits all. So the more that we can put out there, the more that we can help students.
Yeah, exactly. So continuing on that theme, the next question is, so how do you get reluctant academic staff on board or library staff?
That's super tough. I've been really, really lucky to have great library staff and great learning design staff who are in that space. When we have tried to push, and for example, we have some online degrees that are entirely online where they weren't permitted to have textbooks. So the academics wrote pages and pages and pages of learning management system material that was equivalent to a textbook. And so when we approach them about, hey, would you like to make this into a textbook? It's really innovative. You've got all these great H5P activities and it's very up to date. To make that work, we really needed to do a lot of hand-holding. So it was, do you give us permission to go into your learning management system site and take the things that we think are going to work in the book and then draft that up and then give you something to have a look at? And adapting is always the easiest one. Oh, yeah, you can adapt an OER. You might be able to get that book already in something like a Pressbooks format or some sort of the EPUB format, which is then easier to edit. In working for a very long time in managing and wrangling academics, it's a lot like herding cats. And so the more that you can create structure around that and say, look, oh, I found this great open text that I think is right in your area. Do you want to flag the bits that you think you're going to want to do more work on? There might be the ability to get some of their casuals involved and they might be involved in review. But if you've got people who are super reluctant, I just probably wouldn't go there. What I do like to do, a little bit of a secret sauce here, just between me and everybody else who's listening, is that I've trained my students who love open resources to leave feedback in other subjects about, hey, it would be so great if these textbooks were so expensive. Wouldn't it be great if there was an open resource like in this subject? Maybe you would want to ask Amanda about how she did it. So I've done a lot of work in training students about how to give feedback about things they don't like, to try and encourage academics to say, oh, look, it wasn't just one person saying this. Did you know that 50 out of 200 students said something about this open textbook and they mentioned your name? So here I am to come talk about it. So it's how you figure out how you work from both the bottom up, try and get that coalition of the willing. And there are the universities that do this the best tend to be regional institutions that are more practiced at having a wider participation from their community. I find that, we're ranked number 9, but I find in the group of 8, and a lot of the higher ranked institutions, it's like, oh, well, we get good students regardless. They'll figure it out regardless. But I think in institutions where they've got a wide variety of students from a wider background, their librarians are much more versed in this space, and like CSU and USQ, so USQ, so the University of Southern Queensland are really great in this space. There's quite a few universities in regional areas that are just, they're better set up. And so sometimes connecting with some of those people, and Deacon's another good one because they have a lot of distance education, and Charles Sturt can be a way to figure out how do we tap into this network. And I've done a lot of chats with people at other institutions where somebody in the library has gone, oh, Amanda, could you have a chat to this academic who's very keen but very scared, and create some of that confidence.
Yeah, great. Thank you. At UTS, do you see the culture shifting to valuing OERs and not letting traditional publishing to support student learning?
Open publishing for journals, yes. Because when you publish a journal article in an open access way, the alt metrics just go through the roof because people are more able to read, download, and then cite the paper. I think we're still facing a lot of challenges when it comes to creation from the education standpoint. And that is a range of different things. So if you didn't realize, like, management at UTS are trying to cut 10% of our workforce, so everybody's a little bit like, I don't want to do anything hard. But it has been quite difficult because as a university that is focused in all of its performance metrics on increasing its QS ranking and its THE ranking, most of those rankings are driven by research. And so how we ensure that teaching and these types of things are included, one of the things that is on my list of things to do is to find out who actually writes the guide to being promoted as an academic, because it lists a whole lot of different things that you might do to demonstrate competency in teaching and learning and innovation in teaching and learning and building student experiences, and actually figure out how in that guide I include some line about open education. Because if it's in there, people who are working backwards will go, oh, I'm looking for things to do to get promoted. Oh, there's an open education thing. What is that about? So it's about how do you come at it from all sides, especially at somewhere that's very research intensive, like UTS. You would probably need, and I love my DVC, Kylie Reedman, you would need a deputy vice chancellor, academic or education, and a vice chancellor who were going to push on this as a major piece of work. Like, hey, as an institution, the people who are taking these particular actions are going to receive this specific teaching relief, are going to be eligible for these other benefits. How can we create structural change? And that's where probably the Accord is not as clear on implementation, but I think it's going to be one of these really important things that if we're going to do support of students well under the Accords, we need to think at a more institutional level about how we support. And in degrees that are very expensive, that have very expensive textbook costs, this is going to be one of those ways, I think, that could make a really big difference to students, because it's something they can access anytime. It's the anchor in their learning. And with AI tools, I was like, hey, could I figure out how to get Morgan Freeman to be the voice of my textbook? Like, what could we do to use our open resources and AI to then, again, find more ways to support students in their learning.
Yeah, we've got 2 more questions.
Oh, exciting.
This person writes, how can we integrate some of the ideas into public libraries? I would love to offer more to students and lecturers, but we don't often do reference materials.
Ooh, public libraries is interesting. And this is where maybe I know that libraries have become a really big place. Like I hung out at the library was the social place I hung out as a young student. Probably not any surprise that I was a geek, still a geek, went into a really geeky type of career. And I've recently picked up Dungeons and Dragons, so my geekdom has just gone way through the roof there. But with so many students studying and platforms that I don't like StuDocu, and ThinkSwap, which is about students creating notes that they're swapping with each other for academic advantage. How could we figure out how libraries might be that collection point to help students help other students as another way of bringing students into libraries, but also bringing their collective knowledge into play. That could be one other way that it might work. Not from an open textbook process, but like in Sydney, there is a library that is about lending physical stuff, like tools. It's the City of Sydney Tool Library where you could borrow camping equipment or a sewing machine or other things. But how could we figure out how we could get experts together in our public spaces? And I think about this from the high school student perspective,
Yep.
especially to, give them more resources without having to pay for ThinkSwap or StuDocu to try and gain that academic advantage. It's about how do you level the playing field by saying, hey, do this for other people. And that could even be like hey, like I'm giving this person kudos because I used this study guide and it was really helpful for me.
Yeah. And the last question, do you have plans for writing another OER?
Yes, I do. So I started in auditing financial statements. That was my professional background. I came in to teach that for about 15 years. And we had textbooks. I didn't really prescribe one because we have regulation. And a lot of where my YouTube came from was actually reading the regulation out loud and stopping and annotating and explaining. And so I think I teach first year right now, because we needed a different approach to first year that was more based on belonging and transition and educational psychology. But eventually, I think I'll be shuffled back into a more advanced unit in which I do have plans to create an audit textbook related to in that OER sense. And look, for people who are worried about a platform, I've seen open education resources as Google Docs in links. And you can create a Google Doc and you can create a share link that allows somebody to copy it. So as soon as they click on the link, it just duplicates a copy for them. So there are lots of ways that you can do that. I think one of the ones I have is a grade calculator. So you put in your assessment tasks, the weighting, what marks you've got, and then it shows students this is how much I need to pass. This is how much I need to get a credit, distinction, and a high distinction. As an accountant, I can work that out myself, but for a lot of students, that's quite scary. So it could even be really small tools that you could use, that you could make as open resources and share on LinkedIn or other places. Where I think we struggle is that there's nowhere that's a repository for all of this stuff. It sometimes is in like OER Commons, but I think I need to do that probably a little bit more religiously, is get myself in a more structured way for the things that we create that I share out to students, how we put those somewhere so that, they live on.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for all your questions. And thanks again to Amanda for preparing and delivering this keynote and engaging with the audience.
Jenny, you're welcome to come to accounting anytime. Anyone who wants to come and see what accounting is like at UTS, if you're ever in Sydney, hit me up. We have an open classroom policy as well as open education. So people are welcome to walk in anytime and have a chat to me, or I'm happy to chat with people afterwards or at any other point.
Great, thank you. As this was our final presentation, I will now hand over to Teresa to wrap up the webinar.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kate, for facilitating the Q&A. We had some really creative and interesting questions in there. So here's the segue. Speaking of creativity, the Raven Mascot competition, which has been running in the lead up to the seminar, is now closed for entries. So we've received some truly delightful contributions, which you can find through the hashtag CRIG, CRIG 2025 on LinkedIn, if you can't wait until tomorrow to see them. So tomorrow's webinar is where you'll have the chance to see all the Ravens in one spot and vote for your favourite that embodies the seminar theme of open doors, open minds. So to wrap up the things for today, I really want to thank Leigh and Amanda for sharing their expertise, experience and practice with us. It was so informative, impressive, and I loved the personable nature of both of our keynote speakers. It was great. It was such a pleasure to have you here. So a shout out also to my seminar working group colleagues as well for their really hard work in organising and running this event. Much appreciated. So feel free to contact the speakers with any further questions that you may have after the webinar. Some have been provided. I think Leigh provided his earlier. You can send an email to members@caval.edu.au, as you can see there on the screen, and the team will forward those questions on your behalf. As a special thank you gift to our wonderful presenters, Caval has arranged for native trees to be planted through the organisation 15 Trees. So the trees were planted this winter through 2 sets of plantings in Westgate Park in Melbourne and Mount Mercer in regional Victoria. There you go. So thank you. So that's it for day 2, but we've got lots more coming up. So tomorrow at 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, we will be bringing you a short presentation and 2 lightning talks from RMIT University, Deakin University, and the University of Melbourne, before finishing with a powerful keynote on a decolonised library by Professor Kathomi Gatweri. I hope I pronounced that properly. So Kathomi is one of Australia's leading Afro-diasporic scholars whose award-winning interdisciplinary research investigates the intersecting topics of racial trauma, belonging, blackness, and migranthood. So Kathomi's keynote will not be recorded, so make sure you join us live. And of course, we'll find out whose Raven takes home the first place in the Raven Mascot competition. So you can find the registration links and links to further information in the chat. And thank you everyone for attending today, and look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day and the weather is good to you. Thank you, everyone.